I'm Dave Kendall of Prairie Hollow Productions. We invite you to join us as we venture across the Flint Hills to explore this undulating landscape and to reflect upon the forces that led to the creation of a prairie preserve here. It's been almost 20 years since the Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve in Chase County became part of the National Park Service. As the Park Service proudly celebrates its centennial in 2016, we'll put the spotlight on our own Prairie Preserve and the communities that surround it as it marks its 20th anniversary.
I think it's important for us to keep in mind, and maybe I say it too much, but when we're right here at the Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve, we're kind of in the midst of all that there is of the Tallgrass Prairie functionally. I mean, yeah, there are big chunks of it. There's 1,000 acres here and there in Iowa and Missouri and a few thousand acres. But when you talk about its full ecological expression, the grandeur and glory of the Tallgrass Prairie that the Native Americans revered, that made ranchers able to survive here, this is it. The Flint Hills is it. From Manhattan to Tulsa, there's about 4 million acres, and it is still the least conserved and most diminished ecosystem type in North America.
And I think finally we as humans are realizing, that what's good for nature is actually really good for us. And I know the ranchers are feeling this. And one other thing about the preserve that I'm so happy about is I think at first, when it was first proposed, this adversarial relationship between the ranchers and the environmentalists, like those could never be the same thing. And that has, I hope, gone away. And we have now our ranchers realize that we're environmentalists, and the environmentalists have very critically now understood that ranching is the best way to preserve the prairie. We are what's keeping prairie in prairie. And so when I go up to the preserve and I see in their exhibit that they are not demonizing ranchers, they're celebrating ranching and they're promoting the ranching culture and history and how valuable, that's what the Flint Hills are. So we're all in this together. There's no adversarial relationship, I hope.
The Flint Hills is one of the last great places in the world. It's one of those great special places. It's not often appreciated by those of us who live here because it's just always been here. A friend of mine went from college to New York, and when she came back 15 years later, discovered that there were hills here. They've always, of course, been here, but we don't often appreciate them when we just are living in them. But it is truly one of the last great places on earth that needs saved. And I say that kind of gently because the ranching community especially is a bit touchy about needing to be saved. But we've come to realize there are things that are bigger than us and that we do have to educate the public and ourselves about things that are going to work for us and against us. And public opinion can work against us.
It had a very contentious history. It was a very difficult thing, but Nancy Kassebaum stepped right up to the plate and worked it out for both sides to come together, and she did her usual great stuff.
When I was in the Senate, of course, was the beginning of a time that they were still struggling and had been for years on trying to figure out how best to protect the land called the Flint Hills. I only watched it from the sidelines at first. I really didn't feel the intensity until I got involved. It was like the Hatfields and the McCoys. It was a real clash as this concern grew, how much land would be taken in, what would be the use of a park, and who would run it. I don't know why I happened to get drawn in like I did. Maybe because of an interest in the region. I mean, at that point, I had property here. And Governor Carlin put together a group with representatives from all sides. We went through a lot of different meetings and efforts to try and bring people together. As I said, I came along, I think, after everybody was kind of exhausted and were seeking to find something that could come to some resolution. And it finally became law as one of the last pieces of legislation to come through the House in 1996 when I was retiring.
The legislation was passed on the last day that the Senate was in session, so it's amazing that the preserve's here really when you go through the history and consider what, all the effort that was made through decades, and then at the end how it just came together at the last minute. The Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve serves a number of functions, and I think of greatest importance is it focuses the opportunity for appreciation of prairie in a way that the public doesn't have access to when everything is in private ownership. Only a few people have friends, who have ranch lands, and so they're the only ones sometimes who get out and get to walk on the prairie and photograph the wildlife and the changing seasons and all that nature has to offer. But now that we have a preserve and some other areas in the state that offer similar opportunities, then they're open to the public. And as they have opportunities to have access to the land, they learn to love it, understand it and love it, and that helps across the board in terms of conservation, across the board in building appreciation for what good landowners do, and in support of programs that enhance that as well.
I think one of the real attractions to this place is to be able to use them to imagine what this was before Europeans came out here and rearranged the landscape. I tell people all the time, I remember as a kid reading these pioneer accounts of wagons that came across the landscape and the pastures were carpets of wildflowers. And I always tell people, I never expected to see that because we've rearranged this landscape so much. There aren't very many places you can go to see that today. There are a few, but there aren't very many. I think in some respects, the Flint Hills are this substitute for what it looked like before we got here and changed it.
It takes a while to appreciate the subtleties of the Flint Hills. The Flint Hills are subtle. They're not in your face. It's a subtle thing, so it takes being in them and looking at them for a period of time to begin to appreciate them. And they reward a careful observation, an observational attitude. And when we're observational, we are in a sense reverent, I think. It's a meditative experience. It's a good place to leave your cell phone at home and just be there, be present in the hills.
I think that we will, over the course of the next decade or two, we're going to see more and more visitation and more activity out here. But hopefully it will be in a way that's not detrimental to the resource. I remember when the discussions of a Tallgrass Prairie National Park first came up, I grew up just west of here in Marion County, and I actually remember having some concerns about it becoming developed. And fortunately, that unbridled development has not occurred. And one thing that's really cool working here in the Flint Hills, the people here love this landscape. They love the Flint Hills. And I think most people here are very open to sharing the landscape, to showing it off. They're proud of it. But it does need to be done in a balanced way.